So we're going to get started, and I just wanted to start this webinar with norms for respectful conversations and questions. So please keep your cameras off and microphones muted at this time. If you have any questions, feel free to write them at any point in the chat. We should have a little Q&A section. We will get to them at the end, but if you have a question as we're going along, feel free to write it. During this webinar, please seek to understand others' perspectives and be kind to yourselves and others. And like I said, this webinar will be recorded. And if you'd like a recording of the webinar, you can email us at advance@uwosh.edu. So now I'd like to take a minute and introduce the team. So if Dr. Jennifer Christus would like to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Shuttlefield Christus. My pronouns are she and her. I am the PI for the advanced grant at UW Oshkosh, and also an associate professor of chemistry and the director of the UW System Alliance for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Advancement in STEM.
Thank you. Dr. Samantha Larson.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Sam Larson. Pronouns are she, her, hers. I serve as the co-PI on our advanced grant here at UW Oshkosh. I'm also an assistant professor in the Department of Public Administration on campus and deputy director of the Whitburn Center for Governance and Policy Research. A lot of the work that I'm doing on this grant focuses on reporting, evaluation, and analysis.
Thank you. Dr. Denise Roseland.
Hello, everybody. I'm Denise Roseland. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. I'm serving as the external evaluator on this project.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm Karee Orrick. I'm the project manager. So if you need anything, if you have any questions about the grant, you can email me and I can direct you in the right way. So before we jump into the presentation and talk a little bit about the grant, we want to do a quick land acknowledgement, because truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. UWO campuses occupy ancestral Ho-Chunk and Menominee lands. We commit to acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this and all territories. We commit to honor and respect many Indigenous peoples still connected to the land in which we gather remotely. Please consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that connect us together today. So with that, we would like to talk a little bit about the grant. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Samantha Larson.
Yeah, thanks, Karee. So just to give folks an overview for those of you who aren't already familiar, what we are focusing on today is connected to the Advanced UWO 3 Campuses 1 Institution grant, which is supported by a 3-year, $1 million just under $1 million National Science Foundation advanced grant, and it's really divided into these 3 phases. So we're in kind of phase 1 at this moment, which focuses on building capacity, specifically capacity for change across the 3 campuses of Oshkosh, Fox Cities, and Fond du Lac. Our second phase next year that we really want to focus on is thinking about different training opportunities for both faculty and staff based on some of the findings of the work that we're doing this year and that we'll be doing through the summer. And then the final phase, phase 3, really focuses on policy and procedure change in our year kind of 2024, 2025. Throughout this time period, there are a number of activities that are happening, and those are listed below. I won't read through them, but the real aim is to focus on resolving existing inequities in policies and procedures at UWO, which will also lead to greater recruitment and retention of a higher proportion of STEM faculty specifically and instructors who identify as women, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and members of the LGBTQ+ community. And Karee, if you want to go to the next slide. We want to briefly talk a bit about why this work is important. And so, I mentioned on the last slide that one of our key activities in this first year is building capacity, which includes collecting relevant data to track progress on equity in STEM at our institution. So this data can really help us to understand why this work is important and specifically focusing on representation of men and women in our STEM faculty positions is one of the many, many data points that we're beginning with here. So I just want to direct your attention first to the chart on the left-hand side of the screen. So this shows the first bar there shows on a national scale, just to give you a sense that STEM faculty who identify as men make up about 64% of the academic workforce compared to 36% of faculty women in STEM. And this is based on a 2021 report by NSF, which the source is noted below there for you. So to give us a little bit more of a picture about what's happening at our campus at UW Oshkosh, just in preliminary data collection efforts through HR data, we've also found that the same percentages actually apply at UW Oshkosh campuses, with 64% or 62 of STEM faculty being men and 36% or 35 of STEM faculty being women. And we did note the departments that we pulled these figures from within our math and science division, noted below on the screen here. So far, we have also looked at a few other metrics, which are actually included on the right-hand side of the screen. So if I can direct your attention to the chart on the right-hand side. So looking at data since 2015, the new hires in STEM departments have included 11 men and 12 women. So this shows that all 11 men were hired at the Oshkosh campus, 1 woman hired at the Fox Cities campus, and 1 woman hired at the Fond du Lac campus, and then 10 women were hired at the Oshkosh campus. So therefore, women made up about 52% of STEM faculty hires. However, when we look a little closer at the gender breakdown of resignations over that same time period, it demonstrates a pretty interesting picture, showing that only 1 out of 12 resignations have been men. Specifically, that was men faculty at the Oshkosh campus. And in comparison, 11 women faculty have resigned from STEM departments as of 2022, one of them being from the Fox Cities campus. So 92% of resignations have been women. There have been additional resignations for the 2022-2023 academic year that we're currently in, but those will actually be included in our data for 2023 captured next year. So we wanted to share this. Of course, this only tells part of the story. And I want to hand it over quickly to Dr. Denise Roseland, our external evaluator who you just met, to share a little additional research she's been conducting that helps us further understand some of the dynamics and disparities that we're starting to see.
Thank you, Sam. So in February, let me start over. In fall of 2021, we conducted a climate survey of faculty and instructional academic staff at the 3 campuses in preparation of submitting the advanced proposal. And we were looking to examine faculty's perception of climate at the institution, in their departments, and at the college level. And so here we see one response. And I think these are indicative of why perhaps we're seeing this disproportionate resignation and departure of women from STEM departments. 100% of the men surveyed. We had a 46% response rate of all faculty in IAS. 100% of the men said they were somewhat or very satisfied with their position at UW Oshkosh, whereas only 45% of the women indicated that level of satisfaction. This one is a statistically significant result with Cohen's D an effect size that's medium. Next slide, Karee. At the department level, we asked some additional questions about satisfaction and perception of climate within the department. Again, we see the same sort of disparate results. 85% of men indicating they were somewhat or extremely satisfied, 38% of women indicating that same level of satisfaction. So together, these things are indicative, I think, of showing that there are really perceptions of 2 different climates at UW Oshkosh. One, if you are a man, and one, if you identify as a woman. I think next slide, Karee. We also were looking at a number of different measures about the role and tasks performed by faculty in IAS, advising, teaching, service, and research and scholarship. We saw very different perspectives about how that work was valued or the nature of the workload that faculty had as well. Women faculty were 3 to 4 times more likely to have 25 or more advisees in their advising load. Men faculty were 3 times more likely to indicate that their research was valued in decisions made within the department. Women faculty were 6 times more likely to indicate that their service was not valued in the same way in the department. Men faculty, 2 times more likely to indicate that they were satisfied with the current external funding for their research and scholarly work. So very different lived experiences within the climate of UW-Oshkosh. Next slide, Karee. As the evaluation and SS project moves forward, we're really, I think, hoping to sort of support Advance UWO in accelerating and moving effective intersectional interventions, prevention strategies, and response models into practice that are really centered on the perspectives and the needs of women, underrepresented minorities, and marginalized folks in STEM at the institution. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jenny.
And I am just going to say we're going to get started with our panelists then. So thanks to my colleagues for presenting and giving sort of an overview of the grant. I hope that that gives you a sense of some of the things that we have been doing and some of the data that we've collected and started to look at and now are ready to present to the community. And so today we actually, based off the data, we thought that it was really important for us to start thinking about allies and how we all can help gender equity in the STEM departments and at our institution. And so we have invited panelists today to talk about some of their experiences and their efforts in their time. And so I am going to just ask each one of them to introduce themselves. And so I'll start with Chris, who's at the top of my list here. And if you want to take a few minutes and just introduce yourself. So please go ahead.
Yes, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. Second, I would like to congratulate your team, UW Oshkosh, for receiving this award from NSF, an advanced grant. That's a big deal. So congratulations. About me, my name is Cristinel Ababei, but I go by Chris. Please call me Chris. I'm an associate professor here at Marquette University in the College of Engineering and the Electrical and Computer Engineering department. I've been here for almost 10 years. Before that, I spent 1 year at SUNY at Buffalo. And the reason for which I want to go back in time a little bit is because I want to provide a little bit more context to your listeners and viewers of this panel. Before that, I spent 4 years at North Dakota State University in Fargo, North Dakota, where Roger Green, another panelist here, was my colleague, still friend. So that's who I am. But I've been a co-PI on the advanced grant that we have here at Marquette. We are in year number 4 as a no-cost extension year. The grant is going to end this fall semester, and I've been primarily in charge on driving the effort of advocates and allies here at Marquette University.
Thank you. Chris Gentry.
Hi, thanks. I'd like to echo Chris's comments to the UWO PIs as well. Congratulations, this is a really great opportunity. My name is Chris Gentry. I'm a professor of geography in the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at Austin Peay State University in Clarksville, Tennessee. My research integrates the fields of biogeography, dendrochronology, and spatial analysis to investigate landscape scale dynamics and disturbance in forested ecosystems. I started doing work in the DEI space as a facilitator on the Advanced Geo Partnership in 2020 after attending a Train the Trainers workshop. I'm currently a member of their board of advisors. I've helped facilitate around 40 or something workshops in bystander intervention, implicit biases, microaggression, and field safety and codes of conduct. I'm the incoming chair of the department here, and I've served at a bunch of leadership roles in various offices at Austin Peay. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks. Robert.
Yeah, hi, I'm Rob Gordon. I'm on the faculty of the Department of Psychological Sciences at Auburn University. I've been at Auburn since 2017. Prior to that, I was also at North Dakota State University for many years. And while I was at NDSU, I got involved in the Advocates and Allies program, first as an ally and then as an advocate. And since leaving NDSU, I've sort of maintained that connection with my colleagues at NDSU and have visited a number of institutions to help them establish similar programs to the program at NDSU. So happy to be here today.
Thank you. And Roger.
So hi, and thanks for having me as well. My name's Roger Green. I'm a professor in the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department here at North Dakota State University. I began my DEI work in 2009 when NDSU got an NSF Institutional Transformation Grant. And really the key reason for me being part of that is when we were thinking about how do you transform an institution, some really smart women on campus recognized you don't do that without getting the majority groups involved. And so our whole efforts have been involving majority groups, namely men in this space, in working to help improve gender equity across campuses. As Rob has said, we've been busy working with other institutions since that time, probably been to about 40 different institutions, helping them set up programs to engage men in gender equity. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And so we just had a series of questions for the panelists. We wanted to sort of start by just asking them to talk about, their experiences, or, was there an event or a personal experience that really helped them to become aware of gender equity issues and sort of want to go into this DI space and start working on it a little bit more. So is there would someone like to start?
Sure, I can start. If that's okay.
Yeah, please.
Well, I was really recruited back in 2009 by Roger Green when I was at North Dakota State University, and he had just gotten that advanced grant. He stepped into my office and asked me if I wanted to join the Allies group. So that's how I got into it. And joining some of those early meetings that we had as a group, I started to learn about gender equity problems. We read articles, and I started to basically be more aware of that. Interestingly, some of the things that I started to learn and be more aware of got confirmed to some extent by my wife, who is an academic as well. So I've been learning and having some confirmations on that front that way. So I became more and more interested, and I realized that it's a issue, a problem that I really cared about. So that's how I got into. But then I left NDSU. Oh, I couldn't take it anymore. No, I'm kidding. But I took that advocacy and allyships that I started, and I got involved at NDSU with me in the back burner. So when I joined Marquette 10 years ago, and I've got the opportunity to get involved into the advanced grant submission here at Marquette. It was a no-brainer for me. I just joined, and luckily we got that. So I've been involved ever since in the advocacy and allyships program here at Marquette.
Yeah, thank you. Would anyone else like to comment about how you got started in working in this space?
I can throw out one example because I think it's through personal failure that we really grow as individuals. So I'll pick an example of personal failure. As an early faculty member, I had a class of 40 students, 4 of which were women. It was a lab-based class, and so I had 10 lab groups, 4 individuals each. I had just read an article on diversity and the value of diversity, which I really thought was compelling. And so I wanted to work hard to try to improve diversity experiences within my class. And one of the ways I did that is I took the 4 women in my class and I put them each on a separate lab group. And so there was only 4 lab groups then with a woman each, but I thought, hey, at least those 4 get diversity. I had a female colleague come and talk to me afterwards, and she's like, what did you do? And I'm like, well, I was improving diversity. And she said, that might have been good for the men on the group, but it was horrible for the women because you took an already marginalized group, further isolated them, and made them less likely to succeed. And that was one that once someone pointed it out to me, it just was like this, hammer on the head. That's like, even though I had good intentions, even though I was trying to do the right thing, I wasn't properly informed, and I did not end up doing something in a way that was actually supporting the equity efforts that we were trying to do.
Yeah, I think for me, I'll take more of a personal route like Roger did, but like much farther back. I grew up in a nuclear family with 2 sisters and a brother. And when I was in high school at the same time as my older sister, and then when she graduated, my younger sister came in while I was still in high school. And my older sister wanted to be an architect, and she took an architecture class, and she got an A in the architecture class and was trying to talk about how to become an architect. our parents were not college educated. So for us as first generation students, the idea of prospects of going to college was sort of, difficult to imagine what that path would look like. And she was told, even though she got an A in the class, that architecture was sort of a challenging major and she should probably consider like something else as far as a degree program. And I don't know that it immediately clicked with me at the time that it was specific, gender equity issues. But I remember my parents talking about it and saying, you can do what you want to do and we'll support you in that. And then when I was a little bit older, as junior or senior in high school, my younger sister, which was honor society all the way through college, she wanted to be a virologist after watching, some of those popular movies with, contagions and stuff like that. And she was told the same thing. She's getting A's in her classes, and they said, well, maybe consider being a nurse or consider, something else rather than doing that. And I wanted to be a veterinarian at the time, didn't realize that there was a lot of blood that was involved. So I decided not to do that. But I was not getting A's in biology and chemistry in some of those courses. And I was just told how to make the path to go become a veterinarian, what school I needed to go to, the classes I needed to take. And it sort of struck me odd at that time because I was being told all the things that I could do with poor grades, and they were being told all the things they couldn't do with good grades. And so when I got into graduate school, one of my faculty members who worked in the LGBTQ space taught the statistics class, and all of the statistics that he was using were educational statistics on gender equity. And that's when it sort of clicked for me that this was a systemic issue within academia. And it was something that I knew when I had the opportunity to become a faculty member and maybe be able to initiate some sort of change, that this was a space that I was going to try to get into.
So I'll try to be kind of quick here, but there was sort of a gradual process of increasing awareness for me, which was facilitated by the fact that my wife and I were in the same department and we're often in meetings together, and so that was helpful. But one particular meeting that really motivated me to become more involved was a meeting where we were making a hiring decision, and there was a woman who had applied for the position who was by far the most productive person in our pool, with multiple grants, ton of publications, relatively senior. And I remember some of my senior male colleagues saying, well, it looks like, it sort of seems like she's been sort of riding other people's coattails. And I thought, like, what are you seeing? and like, what's happening here? And that always stayed with me, that moment. I was relatively junior at the time, but that always stayed with me. And that was very motivating for me, that experience of seeing that happen.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. How did you get involved then? What were your next steps? Like, what did if somebody is seeing something similar and they would like to do something, or become more involved, how would they go about doing that? Do you have recommendations for them, or are there, things that maybe they should just read the literature or something? I don't, what would be your suggestions?
It helped at MDSU that we did already, at the time I was getting involved, it was like 2011, maybe 2012, there was already a structure in place for educating men on campus. And so I attended one of the ally workshops that my NDSU colleagues were running. But I also did start doing some reading just on my own at that point too. I don't know if I started with literature exactly, but I started reading like blogs basically, to just learn more about the experiences of women in academia. And so that was sort of how I approached it.
I would throw in one additional thing. So certainly reading is good. I don't believe change happens by accident. I think you have to be intentional about it. So if a person wants change, they must prioritize that and have the intention of changing. And I think there's all sorts of levels of doing that. And if you just want to get started, I'm a fan of doing things that are very simple. So one of the things I recommend men to do is to pick one action item, one thing to work on for like a semester. Put it on a Post-it note, stick it on their monitor. Maybe it is to become a more active listener. Maybe it is to not interrupt their colleagues as much. Maybe it is to be the designated note taker at every single meeting. Maybe it is to be more inclusive in the way they are inviting people, to take everybody out for coffee, you know, in the department over the course of a semester. But pick one thing. Doing one thing and having an intentionality of doing that and having something measurable, I think does all sorts of great benefit in working to building habits and making change.
And I think mine sort of is the same, similar to Roger and Rob. I, became intentional when I got to the university about reaching out to colleagues and interacting with folks that were outside of my academic sphere. And through that process, a colleague and I worked with some folks on the student affairs side of the campus to get a access and diversity grant where we started intentionally including some gender equity and some other DEI components into our college. That sort of just opened up a whole new realm of things to me that were possible for us to do on campus. And another colleague reached out and sent me some information about Train the Trainer workshop that was going to provide more information about this. And so I think, being purposeful about going out and finding those opportunities is the best way to go about it, because they don't always just sort of fall into your lap. So if you're not going to go out and search for those, it's going to be unlikely probably that you're going to be active in the space.
Yeah, thank you. Is there any other comments on that one, or because if not, I have a question about thinking about institutionally. How can men faculty advocate institutionally for gender equity? We sort of were talking about our personal experiences, right, and what we can personally do, in our departments or with our colleagues right next door, or right, but are there things also institutionally we should be thinking about?
Yes, of course. I mean, so to me, just having visited so many different campuses, I think there's a progression in most people's advocacy. So I think it's easier to think about personal action first, because oftentimes men in particular are not terribly informed or comfortable in a space of gender equity. And so I think it's easier to work towards personal change before you jump to institutional. But that doesn't excuse us from not doing some institutional. And again, it's through intentionality and willingness to put yourself in areas or spaces that you hadn't done before. I've not been to a campus out of the 40-some plus campuses I've visited that does not have multiple opportunities for engagement and activity at the institutional level to support equity and DEI. So join that committee that's working on policy change. Join that committee that is doing things like, bystander intervention or whatever the case may be. Just volunteer in there. There's usually pathways to gain the competence you need. It's not all, immediate, and you just need to do it. Although I do think individual action can lead to the feeling of comfort that helps you put yourself out more in a more public way that institutional change might require.
Yeah, so I think that is great advice. There are lots of places, even at UW Oshkosh, we have lots of those same kinds of committees that people can get involved in. Are there, like best practices? Are there things that you have seen that are really effective in those situations, like where you can, where you've really seen sort of faculty perceptions shift, or where people have been able to identify, like, oh, this is important, like this is an equity issue, we need to take this on? Are there places like that where it's been, you've had success in intervening?
May I jump in on this one? Yeah.
Sure.
I wanted to, so there are examples, and I'll give you an example at the end of my comment here. I wanted to share with you that our group here at Marquette has a collaboration with the group at North Dakota State University of Roger Grenades, the group of advocates at Indiana University of Bloomington and University of Dayton. We've been meeting and talking about best practices, sharing things that work and don't work. We've been doing that for almost 1.5 years. We drafted and submitted the paper, which was recently presented last month at this conference Connected. If you are aware of that, I just placed at the beginning of this panel a link to a PDF copy of that paper for the listeners of this panel, if interested. And through our discussions across these 4 different institutions, from an advocates and ally perspective, we identified 3 main themes that we labeled as good practices or things that work. One of them being training, allied workshops, training. This has been working and validated at all our places like that. The other one, which ties back into what Roger was saying earlier, is that it's very good to have advocates and allies on important committees at your institution, and have change from within this committees, and that's my example later on shortly. As a third theme that we identified as a common theme across all these 4 institutions was that we should, in whatever you do, have a women's advisory board that you talk to and bounce ideas to get feedback about what might work and what might not work. So those 3 themes: training, have members, allies in important committees, and have women as an advisory board. My example here is Marquette, which we're really proud of, because we did manage to have a policy change. Is that one of our advocates members is a member of the promotion and training committee at the university level, and it was his own initiative to go there and bring the document that he drafted, and we helped him draft, but it was mostly it's his credit, presenting the case of bias, gender issues, teaching evaluations that women faculty get as lower scores compared to men from both women and men students. All of these things presented, and it is now a document that is part of the promotion and tenure committee that members need to read and be aware of in their assessment process of dossiers that they look at. So we're really proud of that. To call it policy change, but rules to change that to have our committee at that level.
Yeah, thank you. And we can share that link again, just so that people can have that resource. Karee, if you want to just pop that into the chat again. And we are starting to have questions. So in the question and answer, and I'll just ask a couple more questions here, and then we'll have a little bit of time for the question and answer space. So if people want to put their questions into that Q&A chat box, we'll answer those in a minute. And I think, Chris, you brought up a good point sort of about institutionalizing this, right? Like it actually went along into the promotion documents, the literature that shows that. Are there sort of preconditions, or what roles do allies and advocates play in sort of helping change, really have these positive changes take place? Just sort of thinking about what is the role there in that? Does anyone want to take that? Sorry, I hope that question made sense.
Well, yeah, and I can make some comments on this just briefly. It goes back to our original statement that I don't think you can have institutional change without engaging all people that make up the institution. So if you want to change culture, you have to change the people who comprise that culture, and that's not just women. So fixing inequities are not just the responsibility of those who are disadvantaged, and I think that's a key point that we all have to keep in mind. I think it's very easy for men to ignore some of these problems just because they aren't necessarily subject to the negative impacts. And so I think it takes extra effort on the part of men in order to really find that persistence to try to make sure that they're doing something. I do believe, though, that men are also positioned uniquely sometimes to add a voice that can be maybe given some credibility, not maybe it's no more credible, but when our advocates group advocated for campus daycare not closing on campus, I think it was perceived differently than when women did it on campus. There have been cases when disadvantaged groups, for example, bring up the obvious, but then they're seen as acting in their own self-interest. And if they have other people from within the campus also valuing that, I think it can make pathways that show that there's shared value of those and that there's commitment on everybody to see those good practices put in place.
Yeah, and I think I'll echo Chris and Roger on two things. Chris brought up, having things in the TMP process, that help support. We have pretty extensive documents on our campus for our tenure and promotion. And before, let's just say within the last 5 years, there hasn't been intentionality in incorporating DEI efforts and equity into the TMP process. And so doing that work was seen as burdensome, right, for some, because they were taking on responsibilities that they weren't getting any additional credit for or support. While our university has had some sort of support, we've had a African American Cultural Center since 1991. We've had a Latino Community Resource Center for about 20 years. It took until 1995 for the first female geologist to be hired in the TBR system, which was 6 state institutions here in Tennessee. And then so when you're starting to look through the documentation on campus for promotion and for retention, we don't really have a history of how we can incorporate any sort of equity into making sure that retention of individuals that are in these marginalized groups has been sustained over time. So I think when you start recognizing efforts like this, new faculty pay attention to those processes whenever they're coming into the university. More information is available now than ever before. So, they can find on your webpage whether or not your university has support for marginalized communities, and especially if they're a member of one of those. When these start to be recognized, then retention of the current faculty members that you have, it comes up in the promotion narratives and tenure narratives for individuals, and then it becomes integral to your workplace climate. And until it actually shows up in a space like that consistently, it's difficult for individuals to see themselves standing up for those processes on campus because they don't have the type of support. So, we're working diligently to sort of get that way, but you need to have those in place for the people who are coming into those spots too.
So I agree with all of that. I would also just add that I think often the most impact that allies and advocates can have is within their own units. So for example, being attentive to and intervening in like department faculty meetings, or taking the initiative to monitor things like service loads within the department. And so I think part of the impact of advocates is to sort of build networks of men on campus who are attentive to how gender inequity is playing out within their own units, and who are committed to standing up or to changing their own behavior and also addressing behavior from their men colleagues, right? And so there's like the institutional level, sort of like lending your voice to changing policy, which is important. And then there's also the sort of local level stuff, which I think is really impactful too.
Yeah, and I think this is a good place to kind of lead into the question here in the chat. How would you suggest personal efforts to improve gender equity / inclusion in professional academic connections / activities outside of your institution? Are there examples of how to do this when you're not in a position of power? So some personal efforts, again, to improve gender equity and professional academic connections outside of your institution.
So I can make a comment on this, if it's directed more or less to what men can do. That's how I'll speak on this particular one. There was a statement in there about not having power within the organization. But I would come back and say that as a man, you probably have implicit power beyond what some of the disadvantaged or underrepresented groups might have. So even if you're not officially in power, I think you do have a voice, and just being willing to use that voice. It's got a broad range. You've got a continuum of actions that you can do, even if it's just as simple as saying I disagree with that, or shaking your head no, or saying no, that's not how we would, or I don't agree with that. Having conversations about these things, making space for conversations in your organizations, or saying that you value particular things and how are we going to support it, I think also leads to at least prioritizing or discussing how the organization itself might do those things.
So one thing that sort of came to mind, and this, I don't know if this ties in with the question about, well, what if you don't have sort of power within the organization? But I can think of examples. I remember I had a colleague who was invited to be in a symposium, sort of a high-profile symposium at a conference, and he very much wanted to be part of the symposium. But he noticed that there were no women who were invited to be part of the symposium. And so he refused to participate, but he also published sort of an open letter to the organizers of the conference, sort of drawing attention to this fact, explaining why he wasn't participating. And so, I mean, I think that is a way to sort of like lead by example, right? By saying like, I'm attentive to this, you should be attentive to it too, right? And we shouldn't be supporting organizations that are not attentive to it. So he had some power, but he wasn't a leader within the organization, right? And so I think I've always seen that as a really useful example of how to use your position in situations like that.
Yeah, and following up with what Rob said, especially when you're talking about outside of your institution activities, I was on the executive council for the Tree Ring Society for quite a few years, and a lot of the DEI efforts actually came from what we would call grassroots movements within the membership of the society. And so, they pushed forward with, we need to have stronger policies with regards to harassment and bullying in the group. We need to have, more diversity and equity discussions and allyship discussions when we have our, conferences. And the nice thing was that a lot of the individuals that started promoting that within the organization then were receiving good feedback from the executive groups on the Tree Ring Society. And so they then felt empowered to become the next group of executives. So we had a vice president that came in and was one of the leaders in trying to push for better policies for the organization. And so when she came in, the first thing that she did was worked with the individuals that were there to sort of develop new DEI codes of conduct and these. And some of our student members were pushing for some of the DEI stuff that we have done. And one of the students took on a role for the DEI executive on the committee and started a allyship workshop as part of the most recent conference that we had. So even if you're just a member of the group, reaching out to that executive committee, talking about the things that are important to you, you would hope that the individuals on there, have those same concerns and want to support the organization in that way as well.
If I may add, so I would echo what Roger said earlier, that in addition to all of this individual activities that you can do, speaking up or interrupting and saying that you don't agree with that and this, taking the time to maybe nominate for the awards at your institution of your women colleagues and so on. All of that. And in terms of reaching out and networking outside your institution, a good idea is to subscribe to some of these emailing lists. As you know, perhaps the Advance, for instance, programs has an emailing list where they send and post messages about all sorts of information, resources, papers published, articles, sometimes job offers that they have at different institutions. That's a great way to network and to collect and learn more information about these topics. And of course, if you can afford to attend some of these conferences, like the conference that paper that I mentioned earlier was published, and go and attend those conferences. This conference Connected is a conference about broadening participation of underrepresented groups into STEM fields. A super interesting and cool community. The attendees there are very, very open, very willing to network and talk to you and build your network that way.
Yeah, thank you. We have one other question. Again, if you have a question, please feel free to post it in the Q&A chat. But this actually goes back to Chris, when you were talking about the paper that you published and the best practices that we shared. Laura McCullough says, you brought up a good point. We need men as allies because they have power in the systems, but we need women's perspectives and need to be sure they get input into programs. But how do you find the balance there? So, I think this is a really important question, and please, anyone, feel free to answer and jump in here. But I think that's a significant question, right? How do we not overburden, but still get perspectives?
Yes, I would agree, and there has been an argument or discussion always about involving women into advocates and allies groups might already had more service and overburden them with already a lot of service, more than men. But you do still need feedback, and having women groups serve just as sounding boards and not necessarily having them involved in activities and programming, once a semester is doable, and you get useful and helpful feedback. That's what we found. And that's is a good practice across all of those 4 institutions. So I would agree. Yes, we all know women do more service. They're already overburdened. Not to mention that they have, the caregiving. Most of them usually job at home too, which is yet another load onto their shoulders. So it's tricky.
I would say also that sometimes when you get a group of men together and you say go solve something, especially faculty men, they're more than willing to go out and start solving things, and they might not know what they're trying to solve. When we started our program at NDSU, we had a very explicit mission that was given by women on campus who were in charge of our grant. But we read that as we're going to fix gender equity, and we started doing all sorts of things. And for example, one thing we did is we started a mentoring component because we had a couple advocates who were very keen on mentoring. And about a year later, when we bothered to talk to women on campus, they're just like, you did a mentoring? Well, that's great, but we already have a mentoring. So basically you made a competitor to something that was already going on campus. So, and you didn't do the things that we told you to do. So to me, I think it's just a matter of doing that touchstone and making sure that the things that you are doing actually are addressing the problems of the people that you are purporting to serve. It doesn't have to be a huge service burden.
Yeah, sort of along those lines. I mean, when Roger and I have visited other institutions to help them establish these like networks of men allies, sort of critical part of that process is having some sort of accountability path for the work that the men are doing, right? And so we're actually very deliberate, like at the program at NDSU and the program as it's been adapted at other institutions. It's very deliberate in having men who are working as advocates, but then something like a women's advisory group who is sort of guiding that work. There is always this concern about adding to the service burden of women on campus, but the program doesn't work, I think, unless you have that piece in place, because otherwise you get the situation as Roger described, where men might feel like, oh, I know exactly what the problem is, I know exactly how to solve it. But they often have, because they're new in this space, they have often a limited understanding of what the best approach is, right? And so we've been very deliberate about putting that structure in place where the men don't go out and do something until they've talked to a women's advisory group and saying, like, is this the thing that we should be doing? And there have been times at NDSU where men had ideas, not just the case Roger talked about, but other ideas as well, where men were like, well, this is a thing we'd like to do. And then we talked to the women on campus who say, well, you know, that's actually not where we think your efforts are best put at the moment, right? And at that point, we shift, right? That's the thing that we thought we might do, but no, that's not what we're going to do, right? Because the program, I think, falls apart if you don't have transparency, and it falls apart if you don't have accountability. And so I think that's critical.
And I think also being like really intentional about what you're doing. You know, we've talked a lot about making sure that, you know, we're not overburdening, you know, with service, right? And this happens, you know, for all kinds of marginalized individuals that are at our university. But it's not the point of bringing somebody in to be a sounding board, right? It's being intentional to bring somebody in to be a partner in a group, right? So not having them come in as a advisory member on a grant, but bringing the individual in to be a PI on the grant to ensure that you get that important feedback for those individuals. And then it doesn't turn into, you know, specifically a service project, you know, it turns into, you know, an active participation and partner in this group. We've made sure that we've done that in some spaces on campus. We've got some leadership groups. I'm a part of a new chairs faculty leadership group that's led by one of our, you know, female chairs on campus. And the intentionality of having, you know, her as the organizer and coordinator of this, you know, leadership program means that, you know, that perspective is always, you know, full front. And so as a new male faculty, new chair, you know, male, when I come into these meetings, right, I know that all of the perspectives that, you know, I need to hear are going to be represented, because the individuals are not in there as just an advisor or a sounding board, right? They're taking active roles in the participation of these groups. And I think that really helps make sure that there is that balanced perspective and at least, you know, what we're hearing in those individual scenarios.
Yeah, Sam, you have your hand up.
If it's an okay time for me to ask a question, I've been itching on one, just as hearing all of you talk. And, you know, I'm familiar with the Advocates and Allies program that started at NDSU because I was a master's student there when that was all getting going. And so I guess my question is, maybe it's two questions. One is, where do you start building a network of men that collectively see the value in putting their time into doing this work? So maybe that's question one. And related to that, how do you get people to show up at a training who maybe, right, like nervous or don't quite understand like the value of DEI work and their role in it? Because I think one thing that we see at UW Oshkosh especially, and I've seen this in other institutions I've been in and other spaces I've been in, the same people show up to the DEI trainings every single time. So how do we start to change that?
So I'll jump in just for a quick one. I think part of that's the reason why we have an Advocates and Allies group, right? Because you have a structure, you build a structure to encourage networks, right? I think there's not been an institution I've visited. I've gone to lots of institutions, and there's always people who want to do this work, but almost never until someone says, let's get a group together and work on it, do they come together. So having a structure that actually encourages people to come together, I think the people are there. I think there's people that have tons of life experiences and commitments to doing good that want to do good. They just need a structure to do it. So there needs to be someone who can champion building that structure, bringing that structure together. And then I think it will happen. I just don't believe there's an institution out there that can't support a group like this. When it comes to getting, new voices in and new space, or new people into those spaces, I think there's 2 points that I would like to bring on that. One is it's a long-term process. We are all on a path. None of us is perfect. We're all growing, right? And we need to find ways to allow everyone to grow and not kill them when they're making mistakes. So I make mistakes to this day. I need to be able to have someone hold me accountable and point those out to me, but also not roast me over the fire for it. That's one of the reasons we have all men things like workshops, is just so people can sit there and say, yeah, I don't know if I believe this gender equity stuff. It doesn't reflect my experience. And it allows them to say that in a way that they can maybe be a little bit more candid. And it's a long-term game, right? So if you have a group on campus that's been established and they have a commitment to doing something like a workshop, every semester, and you find different ways to target or recruit different groups of people, over 10 years, you start reaching a lot of people. At NDSU, we have reached every single department out there. There's been people trained from every single department. And that certainly wasn't the case when we started. It's a long-term game and intentional.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to add that. So my sense is that there are a lot of men on campus for whom this sort of aligns with their values, but where they don't really see that they have a specific role to play. So I think once you have that structure in place of like a group of advocates, I think you can often be very effective through like personal invitation, right? Saying like, I know that you share my view on this. I would love it if you could come to one of these. And if you have advocates who are like even just like relatively well connected at the university, which often you do, you can pull in a lot of people that way, and then it starts to kind of build on itself, I think, after that.
Can I just throw something in on what Rob said? Personal invitation works for getting people involved. We just went through a new advocate recruitment here at NDSU. We put out the generic mail, email call solicitation for applicants. We received none. Okay. And then I said, okay, that didn't work. And I said, let's activate the women on campus and the men in the advocates group and identify people who we think are good. We sent out a bunch of nominations saying you were thought to be good on this. I now have 7 new advocates coming into our group this year. Right. So personal invitations work.
Including, I would say, personal invitations from women on campus too, not just from the advocates, but women saying like, I think you should go to this. There's multiple meanings of that, I guess, but one could be, I think that you would be that your voice in this would be helpful, right?
I think Roger gave the perfect answer early on. I would just add that because this I remember when he reached out to me back in 2009, mentioning that they had coffee and cookies at those training workshops held was to get me in there and then learn about things.
Well, and I think when Sam mentioned, the part about bringing new people into the workshop, Jenny and I are facilitators on, workshops as well. And we've had the same conversation, like how do you bring people to the table that need to be there versus the individuals that are going to show up every time. And I think that sort of goes back to what Chris mentioned quite a while ago, and what a few of us have sort of talked about is making the point that this is valued at the university, whether you incorporate it as part of, evaluations, annual faculty evaluations, or whether you make it, something that you provide some release time to say, this is important enough to our department that we will provide you the space to be able to go and join this, rather than making it something that's an additional thing for individuals that then they can justify as a burden, right? Well, I already have to teach, I already have to do this, I have this other thing, so I don't really have the space and the time to do it. Well, as a department chair, as a leader, or as an individual that has some ability, you can make them have that time, right? And so we can say, okay, well, you don't need to sit on a couple additional committees. You don't need to do this. We'll reduce your advising load or something, so you have the time and space to do it because we value it as being something that's important. And I think that's something that, we can go a long way to make some headway for individuals that way as well.
All right, well, we are coming to an end. There was one last question in the chat. I'm just going to answer that quickly about, unless somebody wants to take it, about identifying as an ally in the classroom. But I basically was just going to say the same things apply, right? That we're talking about here, being intentional, asking students for feedback, using inclusive teaching practices, trying to understand the data that you have in your classroom. Kind of all those same things apply as we've been talking about. And so I want to thank you all for your time and thoughts and your work. We appreciate it very much. And we hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.